Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
Always exciting to be back.
Today, we're tackling a big one. I mean, it's the document for America,
The Constitution. Yeah, it's a foundational document for sure.
the U.S. Constitution,
Yeah.
but not just the high school civics class version.
Right, right.
We're go deep, and to guide us, we've got the actual text straight from the National Constitution Center.
The real deal.
And let me tell you, getting up close and personal with this thing,
Yeah.
there's some seriously interesting stuff in here.
It's fascinating. Like you really see the thought process, the just sheer amount of work that went into crafting this thing.
Absolutely. So where do we even begin with something like this?
Well, you got to start at the beginning,
Makes sense to me.
and that means the preamble.
Okay, the preamble.
Which, by the way, it's not just some fluffy intro.
Right.
It sets the stage. It's like, here's why we're doing this whole America thing.
We the people. I mean, talk about a mic drop moment in history,
Perfect.
right?
Bold move. And it goes on. A more perfect union, justice, domestic tranquility, common defense, general welfare, securing liberty. These weren't just, lofty ideals.
Right.
They were directly addressing problems they had under the Articles of Confederation.
The sort of pre-constitution, the first attempt,
Right. The warm-up band.
we're like, okay, that didn't quite work out so well.
Yeah, time for a do-over.
Round two, let's try this again. So then we get into Article 1,
Article I, the legislative branch.
Congress. But wait, two of them. We've got the House and the Senate. What's the deal with that?
2 words. Checks and balances. The founders, they were really worried about one group getting too much power.
Right.
So they split the power.
Divide and conquer legislative style.
Exactly. The House, based on population, so bigger states, they get more say. But then the Senate. Every state, no matter how big or small, gets 2 senators. It was a compromise, a way to get everyone on board.
And probably still causes just as many arguments back then as it does now, I'm guessing.
Oh, absolutely. But that's kind of the point, isn't it?
To keep things interesting.
To keep things balanced. Now, speaking of the House, there are some, let's say, interesting qualifications to be a representative.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, you got to be at least 25 years old and a U.S. citizen for 7 years.
So younger me, fresh out of college, all gung-ho to change the world.
Not so fast. Got to pay your dues first.
Interesting. Okay, so age limits. Got it. But then there's the Senate. And this is where things get really interesting. Did you know that senators, originally, they weren't even elected by the people?
No, they weren't. They were chosen by state legislatures.
What? Talk about an exclusive club.
The idea was that senators needed a broader national perspective, right?
Right.
Not just focused on local issues.
So they're like the big picture thinkers, the strategists.
Exactly. And it wasn't until much later, with the 17th Amendment, that we get direct election of senators.
The Constitution can change, but that's a whole other deep dive. Okay, so we've got our 2 houses of Congress, but what can they actually do?
Well, Article 1, Section 8, it lays out all the powers specifically given to Congress. Taxation, borrowing money, coining money, regulating commerce between states. Really important stuff.
Sounds pretty powerful.
Oh, they are. But they also had some, let's say, less glamorous duties back then.
Like what? Don't tell me they had to take out the trash in the Capitol building.
Not quite. But they were responsible for establishing post offices and post roads.
Wait, seriously, post offices, that's a constitutional power.
Hey, back then, reliable mail service, that was a big deal. It kept the country connected. But here's where things get really interesting. Article I also has this thing called the Necessary and Proper Clause.
Necessary and proper clause. Catchy.
It's also known as the Elastic Clause.
Elastic clause. Okay, now you got my attention.
It's basically like a catch-all for Congress's power.
A catch-all. How so?
It says Congress can pass any law that's necessary and proper for carrying out those other powers we just talked about.
Yeah, there's like a wiggle room.
Exactly. The founders knew they couldn't predict everything.
Makes sense.
So they built in some flexibility.
Okay, I see where this is going. This elastic clause, I bet that's caused some serious debate over the years.
Oh, you have no idea. It's been at the center of countless legal battles and political arguments.
Because on one hand, you want the government to be able to adapt to changing times. But on the other hand,
You don't want them overstepping their boundaries. It's a tough balance.
no easy answers there.
Nope. And that, my friend, is the beauty and the challenge of the Constitution. It's a balancing act, for sure.
Definitely keeps things interesting. So we've tackled Congress, their powers, those qualifications. But what about the big cheese? Mr. President, Article 2 territory.
Article 2, the executive branch. And you're right, different set of qualifications there.
To be president, you had to be a natural-born citizen, at least 35 years old, and a resident for 14 years.
Interesting how it's a bit more, I don't know, vague than Congress.
Right. Like they didn't get into the nitty-gritty of like residency in specific states or anything.
I think they wanted the president to represent, like, the whole nation.
The face of America.
Exactly. And speaking of representation, Article 2 is also where they lay out that whole electoral college system.
Ah, yes. The Electoral College. Always good for a heated debate.
Right. But think about it back then. Communication wasn't what it is today.
True. No Twitter to instantly see election results.
They needed a system that could work across 13 states, vast distances.
So the Electoral College was their solution.
One of many compromises they had to make. And it's evolved over time. Originally, the top TWO vote-getters would become president and vice president.
Wait, seriously. Imagine that.
Can you imagine the cabinet meeting?
The tension.
Yeah.
The drama.
Talk about awkward team-building exercises. Thankfully, they changed that with the 12th Amendment.
Yeah, good call on that one, founders. But it just goes to show you, they were figuring this out as they went.
Making it up as they went along, but they were smart. They built in ways to adapt, to fix things that weren't working.
Like that whole amendment process.
Exactly. They knew times would change, new challenges would pop up. Speaking of which, Article 3,
The judicial branch. The referees of the government.
the ones who make sure everyone's playing by the rules.
Yeah.
And at the top of that pyramid, the Supreme Court.
9 justices.
Yeah.
Lifetime appointments.
Huge responsibility. Interpreting the Constitution, making sure laws are actually constitutional.
It's funny, that whole judicial review thing, it's not even explicitly stated in the Constitution.
Nope. It came about later, through court cases.
Like Marbury v. Madison.
Well, exactly. That's the thing about this document. It's a framework. It sets the ground rules, but it also leaves room for interpretation, for debate.
Which is where things get really interesting. And speaking of debate, let's talk about those amendments.
Yes, the amendments, the Constitution's glow up. And of course, we can't talk amendments without mentioning the Bill of Rights.
Those first 10 amendments, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, all the good stuff.
The Anti-Federalists, they wouldn't sign off on the Constitution without those protections.
They're like, hold on, we need some guarantees here.
They wanted to make sure the government didn't become too powerful, that individual rights were protected.
Which is something we still grapple with today. Like, what does freedom of speech even mean in the age of the internet?
Right, or the right to privacy. Technology has thrown us some curveballs.
Curveballs the founders couldn't have even imagined.
Exactly. But that's the beauty of this document. It's adaptable. Those principles, they still hold up, even centuries later.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it like that.
It is. This document from, what, the 1700s, it's still shaping arguments about, like, online privacy and stuff.
Exactly. It's not just some dusty old relic. It's like the operating system for America.
Perfect analogy. And just like you want to know how your phone's operating system works, or same deal with the Constitution.
So you can use it better.
Exactly. Understand your rights, know how the government's supposed to function. That's how you participate in democracy. It's empowering.
The founders gave us this incredible tool set. But it's up to us to actually use it.
And not just use it, keep it working. They knew things would change, that we'd face new challenges they couldn't even imagine. Right, like they weren't dealing with, like, artificial intelligence and social media and stuff.
Exactly. But the principles they laid out, those are timeless. Freedom of speech, checks and balances, equal protection under the law.
And that's why we still argue about this stuff. Because it matters.
It does. Because how we interpret those principles today, that shapes the kind of country we're going to be.
It's a big responsibility. But kind of exciting too, right?
Absolutely. We're all part of this ongoing experiment in self-governance. It's messy, it's complicated.
It's America.
Exactly. But it works because we keep talking, we keep debating, we keep striving for that more perfect union they talked about in the preamble.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Constitution, what's one question we can leave our listeners with? How about this? If you could add an amendment to the Constitution today, what would it be? What issue is so important, so fundamental, that it deserves to be in there?
Ooh, good one. Get those thinking caps on, listeners, and let's keep those conversations going. Until next time, stay curious.